Welcome to week 3 of the Exodus study. Today, our focal passage is going to be Exodus 3:13, because we left off on verse 12 last week, through Exodus 4. And these two chapters were just really neat chapters. And I've have been preparing since the Psalm study and reading over these chapters a lot. But man, when you dig into it deeper, with deeper study, just a wealth of just God in these passages. So I'm excited to go through them together today. So before we start though, let's go ahead and review specifically where we left off in chapter 3, because we mostly focused on what we saw in God last week, and we're going to continue to do that, but we didn't talk a lot about Moses's responses to God, and they're going to be really important today. So the first thing I want us to just review is Moses is in Midian right now. Remember, he saw this bush burning and it wasn't being consumed, so this was weird, so he walked over to it. But where is he? In Midian, he is on Mount Horeb, which is Mount Sinai. So this is what they call the mountain of God. So this is a very, very sacred place for the people of Israel, for good reason, because God is revealing himself to them like never before, and will reveal himself again to them like never before when he talks to Moses again when they return for worship. So who is he talking to? Moses is talking to the presence of God in that flame, in the burning bush. And God has already revealed to him that he is holy, right? He said, take off your sandals because this is holy ground. Now, the dirt wasn't anything special. It was God's holiness that was making the place special and holy. And we reviewed the definition of holy as being perfectly good in righteousness and worthy of complete devotion and praise. So another thing that we saw is that God keeps reminding Moses that he is the God of his ancestors. So, and even today, God will repeat over and over and over again that I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Jacob, the God of Isaac. Okay, so he is their God, the people of Israel's God. And then he talked a lot about that he knows, right? We went through that beautiful passage at the end of chapter 2 that he saw them, that he knew what they were going through, and reminded Moses of that. And then that he has a plan. He has a plan of redemption, which we will continue into today. So before we start on new stuff, I did want to cover this because, like I said, we had not recovered Moses's response to God very well. So let's look at Exodus 3:4 for just a second. And it says, I'm going to start in 3. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. So we see that Moses' initial response to God's call, his personal call by name, was one of obedience. So whenever we see this, here I am, that's a good response. We saw it in Abraham when he went to go sacrifice Isaac, and we will see it when people are being faithful. That is their original response. Okay, so he starts off good. But let's look at his next response in 3:11. So God starts into explaining to Moses what he wants to do. And now all of a sudden, instead of here I am, it's a little bit different. So we see in verse 11, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? So now, instead of looking to God, right, he's looking at who am I? Lord, I am not good enough. You need to send someone else. So he's not telling God no, right? But he has some reservations. He has some doubt. So we see this who am I response, looking at his own abilities, his own skills. We see hesitancy, the response of hesitancy in Moses. Okay. And what is God's response to this hesitancy? So we saw in 11, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt. He said, but I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. So God redirects his focus, right? Don't look at yourself. That's when doubt comes in, right? We saw when Peter went to walk on the water in the storm, when he had his eyes focused on Jesus, all was well. But as soon as he started to look at his circumstances and think, who am I, right? That I could walk on water, that's when he started to sink. And so we're seeing that with Moses too, that God is kindly, patiently saying, I will be with you, right? I'm going to give you the ability to do these things. You don't have to rely on yourself. So that's where we left off that last week. So let's start then in verse 13 through 15. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. And thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Okay, so we're going to stop there because this is such an important paragraph in all of Scripture. This is so special that we get to go through this. So I want to explain a little bit of why is this so special. So what does Moses ask God? What shall I tell them your name is, right? So God has already said, I'm the God of your ancestors, but Moses is like, who do I tell him you are? I know you are our God, but what is your name? If we look back to, and I don't think we're going to go there specifically, but in Genesis 33:29, that's that wrestling match between Jacob and the presence of God. And God renames Jacob to Israel. Now remember, these are the children of Israel. And after he does that, Jacob asks God what his name is. And you know what God's response is? It's none of your business. Right? The person who is greater than all of them, right? He is the patriarch. God said, this is not my time to reveal that to anybody. This is something I have specifically seen throughout all the time that is meant for Moses in this moment and the people of Israel for this moment. And so this is a huge deal that he has flat out told Jacob, it's none of your business what my name is. You just have to follow me without a name. And here we see just God's kindness that he is going to be revealing more about himself to this group of people than he has to any other generation. It's amazing. All right. So why is this so important to know his name? So if we think about, well, we have this saying, like to have a good name is to have a good reputation, right? So there's significance with knowing someone's name. It's tied to knowing their person, knowing their character. So when God reveals his name to us, he's also revealing who he is. So Martin Lloyd-Jones says this, to declare the name of God is to tell the truth about God. It is to put the great truth about God's being in a form that people can grasp and comprehend. So when God gives himself a name to the people, it's so that they can grasp something, understand something more about his character and who he is and what he's going to do. Okay, so what does he call himself? He calls himself in verse 14, I am who I am. Oh. So in Hebrew, this is Yahweh, Yahweh, but they didn't use vowels. So that's how we pronounce it. So, but in the original Hebrew, it would have just been spelled out capital Y, capital H, capital W, capital Y. And what this means, this I am who I am, is that it has also been translated, I shall be what I shall be. Just, I exist. So like we have a beginning and an end, God doesn't. So what is he appearing to Moses as? This flame, right? And most fires burn stuff up, right? They need an energy source. But this flame doesn't. This flame has its own energy, its own power, its own existence. We said there's no smoke, right? It's not consuming. It doesn't need the bush. And so God is using this flame, this presence to teach Moses, right? He's a good teacher. And when you go to school for education, it talks about using all the senses. Try to use all the senses, because some people are visual learners, some people need to hear, some people need to touch. And so here we see God is telling, explaining through his words, but he's also showing through this picture of this flame that doesn't need anything else. And that's so true of our God, right? He was, he is, and will be. He doesn't need anything. He has always existed. So this name, this Yahweh, is considered to be the most sacred and holy name of God that we have. And usually when God is setting up covenants, he uses this name. I am who I am, Yahweh. Okay. So I loved this part. Who does he tell that this name is for? And he say, so we're in verse 14. God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel. Does he say, tell it to Pharaoh? No, this is a gift to his children that he will be known by them. Okay. So that his children will know this is a gift to his people, right? So what else does God teach them about his name in this passage? So remember, when he's teaching us about his name, he's also teaching us about himself. So this is a name to be used by the children of Israel. But then if we read on, it says, this is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. So this is not just a gift to the Israelites in Egypt. It is a special gift to us as a generation to come. And he wants to be remembered by this name. And he wants his children to use this name. All right. So let's go now to Exodus 3:16 through 18. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt. And I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to them, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us, and now please let us go on a 3 days journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. All right, so let's slow down and take this apart. So what is God now revealing to them? The game plan, right? It's revealing the game plan to his people. So the first thing we see, step one of what God tells Moses that he is to do. The first thing I want you to do, Moses, go tell the elders that I have appeared to you. Tell them I have observed everything, right? He keeps repeating those same things, that he has seen. He's seen their affliction in Egypt. Let them know that nothing has been unseen. I have not been ignoring them. I've been taking note. Okay. So tell them I have observed everything that has been done to you in Egypt. And then I underlined it in verse 17. And I promise that I will bring you out of Egypt. So he promises that they will be freed from their slavery. And then he also promises to give them a home. So it lists these people groups, but this is just a roadmap of where they're going, of where home is. Okay. Where the promised land is. And then I love this little note at the end, a land flowing with milk and honey. They've been slaves. Do you think they've been feasting? No, they've been for years eating to survive. But now God is telling them in this new land, it's just not about survival. It's about thriving, right? It's about abundance. Like, I'm going to abundantly bless you in this new land. So me and Wes like this show. It's called Alone. I don't know if you've seen it, but all these crazy people that are survival specialists, they like go to these remote places, and the last person that stays wins, I think, $500,000. Okay, so most of these people, though, have to leave because they're starving to death. There's just not enough nutrition. And it's really surprising what they end up starving from, what nutrition they are missing the most, because a lot of times, like, they will have plenty of meat, but that meat is usually very lean meat, and there's not a lot of fat. So like, they really have to survive in these places, they really rely a lot on fish, because fish are high in fat. Well, fat, we always in our brains think of fat as bad, but fat, I mean, without fat, your brain doesn't work. Without fat, you cannot keep body mass. It's not really, fat doesn't turn to fat in your body. And so we see here that milk is a food, because we skim our milk like crazy and we end up drinking like a little bit of milk and a lot of water, right? But true milk is full of this good fat, right? It's going to be a huge blessing to them to have this milk. And then we see the honey, right? Honey, I mean, if you study honey, it is an amazing food. Like, it never spoils. Think about that. Never spoils. And what is it to the taste? This is the closest thing to candy there is in this time, right? It's sugar, it's sweet. Life is going to be good for you in your new home. It's not going to be like this harsh place you've been living in slavery. Okay. I got on a side tangent with the foods today. Let me see if I can refine where we were. Okay, so these promises are good promises to the people. So, all right. So he has promised them the land. The next step in the game plan is go to Pharaoh. So first step, go to the elders. Second step, go to Pharaoh. So who is he supposed to go with? Because this is something I had never really picked up on before. I always kind of just envision Moses and Aaron going by themselves, but the elders are going with them. They're going as a team. They're going as a family to Pharaoh, and to tell him that the God of the Hebrews has met with him, and that they are to go sacrifice in the wilderness on a 3-day journey. So when I was thinking about this, like, And it even lists that, I don't know if it's in this passage or when they actually go to Pharaoh, it says they ask, please, can we go? This is a humble request. This isn't a proud people coming. This is a people that have been working 200 years as service to the king without a vacation. And they're asking for 3 days off to spend together as a family, to serve not Pharaoh, but their God. You're okay. You can Wes is tiptoeing in the kitchen. You can't get a drink. So just think of, it just really took me back to think about like how hard Pharaoh must have been already, that this request seems just too unreasonable. All right, so that is the next steps. So let's go to Exodus 19 through 22. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go, and I will give the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house, for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. I know we've talked in the past that God's plan is much better than man's plan, right? So what is God revealing about his plan to him? First, hey, you are going to do these miracles to Pharaoh, in front of Pharaoh, but he's not going to let you go. Okay, it's not going to be your work that convinces him to let you go. But what eventually will need to happen, it says, I will strike Egypt with wonders, right? Those plagues are coming, and everybody is going to be in awe and shock and fear of these wonders. And then he will let you go. So he's not gonna let you go because you ask. He's gonna let you go because of my work, God's work. But then before you leave, you're going to send out the women, right? And they're just going to go and ask. And what are they going to do? They're going to give you all this treasure, which, I mean, they've been slaves for 200 years. They deserve, as payment, this gold that they're going to take. But I love that we see that the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness, they always go about things differently, that God's way is always best. There's no violence in this plundering. And remember, Pharaoh, the first Pharaoh, did not kill who? The women, right? They weren't a threat. But what army is going to go in and plunder them? It's the women. And they don't have to do it by force. God's plan is better. God values women. And this is just a good thing to remember, that we are co-heirs with Christ, that we are equally valued in the kingdom of God. Okay. So Exodus 4, 1 through 5. Then Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, put your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand, caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. All right, so here we see another response from Moses, right? God has just given him the game plan. And what is the first word out of his mouth? But me and Micah were debating something last night, and He had a lot of buts coming my way, right? A lot of excuses about why he couldn't do what I wanted him to do. I think it was get in the bathtub. I think that was it. Just a long list of, but mommy this, but mommy that. Yes. And that's what we see, right? Moses is a scared little kid that doesn't really want to do this big, scary thing, right? So the first thing out of his mouth, started great. Here I am. Then it moved into self-focus. Who am I? And now it's moved into the buts. But what about this? What about that? And so here's the first but. We'll go through quite a few of them. So here's his first excuse. The people won't believe me. And this does seem like a very hard thing to believe, right? That God appeared to me in the desert, right? My first response would be like, that guy needed to drink some water, was hallucinating, right? So he's like, nobody's going to believe that this has happened to me, Lord, right? No one's going to listen to me. So what is God's response to this? And that's just God's just kindness in parenting here, right? He doesn't whack Moses. He's very patient. So we see in verse 2, the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? He said, the staff. So now what we are seeing is, Moses, I'm not going to just send you with your word. I'm going to send you with evidence that I am with you. So this first evidence that he is sending, that the presence of God is with Moses, that this is God's will, is the staff. So God commands him to throw the staff down, it turns into a serpent, right? And what's Moses's reaction? He runs, boy's scared, right? Moses has been a shepherd for 40 years. Shepherd, this is his staff. I mean, you look at pictures, I don't know how historically accurate, but I was Googling some images of staffs, right? They're really tall. So he throws this thing down, turns into a huge snake, right? Huge snake. And based on, I'm just guessing here, but based on Moses's reaction, I would say that this is a deadly snake and he knows it, right? Is this, what is it? What are those hooded? Why can't I think of the name? What are the hooded snakes? Cobras. There we go. Thanks. Cobras, right? And we see cobras depicted in a lot of Egyptians artwork and stuff, and in their staffs. So, I mean, if I had to guess, and this is not scriptural at all, I would guess that this is a big old cobra snake and he hightails it out of there, right? So, but then what does God command him to do? Catch it by the tail. Well, guess what snakes are really good at doing? They're turning around and biting, right? So here we see, even though Moses is afraid, he does what he's commanded to do and picks up that snake. So even though he's throwing out these excuses to God of why he doesn't want to, or we see that he doesn't feel like doing these things, right? His emotions are fear, to run, to self-protect. We do see a faith, an obedience here in Moses to do this, even though it's hard, even though it's not what he wants to do, even though he's still trying to negotiate his way out of everything, right? So I wanted us to look specifically, though, too, at what God tells him about the purpose of the staff and the snake. So the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. Okay, so here's God's response of the why. that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. So who is the they? Children of God again. Is Pharaoh going to be convinced by this? No. This is evidence. This is reassurance. This is comfort to his people that he is with them. All right. So, what does this miracle, what does this serpent and staff, though, reveal to us about God? Okay. It goes from a staff to a snake. So this is creation, right? Now, we're going to get more into the different gods of Egypt, but I really feel that God is showing here in this example that he is the God over creation, right? Moses throws it down, it becomes alive. He picks it up through God's authority, it becomes back a staff. That God is the creator and he is above creation, right? So in Exodus 4:6-9, we're going to see another just very gracious thing that God is going to equip Moses to have to prove to the children of Israel that this is from God and not just some crazy man wandering back out of the desert. So we have verses 6-9. Again, the Lord said to him, "Put your hand inside your cloak." And he put his hand inside his cloak. And when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Then God said, "Put your hand back inside your cloak." So he put his hand back inside his cloak. And when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. If they will not believe you, even with these two signs, or listen to your voice, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the ground. And the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. So here we see second miracle, right? Hand goes in the robe, back out, leprosy. If the snake didn't frighten Moses, this sure would, right? This is a death sentence. Leprosy. Painful disease. Right? So puts it back in though, and then he's healed. This is the second evidence. And what does this miracle tell people about God and his power? The first one I really feel was God showing his power over creation. Now he's showing power over disease and death. The curse. Going to be a lot of cursing to the Egyptians, right? It's going to be important that the people of Israel remember who's over all these plagues, over all of these diseases. They will experience some of them with the Egyptians. God does not spare his people from all of the plagues. But they need to remember who's in control. So if they still won't listen, he's got the third, right? Go get some water from the Nile, pour it out, and it'll become blood. Right? So when we think of water, especially for these people, right, they're in a very arid, dry place. Their water mostly is coming from the Nile River. So it's the source of life in that area. Okay, you can't drink blood. So I really feel like this is God showing that he's the giver of life, right? So he can give life and he can take it. A lot of blood is going to be shed in Exodus. A lot of blood is going to be shed in these next couple of chapters. What does that blood represent? The wrath of God. But has God ever turned water into something else? He sure does. So, wanted to take time and look at John 2, 6 through 11. Now there were 6 stone water jars, there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine, and did not know where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then pour wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." I want us to pay special attention to verse 11. This is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory. And his disciples believed in him. So God in Exodus turns the water into blood. The wrath of God is coming. But Jesus turns the water into wine. Wine and blood look very similar, don't they? And this is one of those things that over and over again, Moses is going to point us to a better deliverer, right? To Jesus. And so we see God reminding the people in Exodus that he is the one that gives water, he can take it away. But here, Jesus reminds them that he is the giver of blessings, the giver of grace in this wine. He improves the water to wine. In this case, it is going to be sweet. And what do we see happens in 11? What is the purpose, right? This is the first sign of Jesus. Guess what? These are the first sign of Yahweh to his people, right? So signs in the Old Testament that reveal to us who the person of God is. Jesus coming to earth revealed himself to us in signs as well. So this should have been an eye opener, and is an eye opener to who? Especially the disciples. The disciples believed. What do we see in the children of Israel? They're going to what? They're going to believe. It's going to produce faith. In 11, verse 11, it says, "This is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory." We are going to see God show up in Egypt, and there's not going to be a doubt that he deserves glory because of his signs that are coming. Okay, it's going to produce belief, and he's going to be glorified through these things. All right. So glory, I think I wrote down the definition for you. So the purpose of Moses' miracles is to show, to reveal who Yahweh is, that he is an all existent God. He is who he is. He doesn't need anything, but that he deserves glory. Okay. Glory is something that secures praise or renown. Exodus 4, 10 through 17. But Moses said to the Lord, "Oh, my Lord, I am not eloquent either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow in speech and of tongue." Then the Lord said to him, "Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? It is not I. Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. But he said, Oh, my Lord, please send someone else. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you. And when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be your mouth. And with his mouth, you will teach. And with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him, and take in your hand this staff with which you shall do these signs. All right. Oh boy. Right. He doesn't say but here, but verse 10 starts with what word? But. Got some more excuses here. So what's the excuse this time? I'm not a great public speaker, which is so crazy. Why? What had he been given in Egypt for 40 years? The best education there was. This is not really a valid excuse. Okay. God has prepared him more than anyone else in Israel to do this job. I've been reading a book about a little bit about the history of the time and in Egypt, and like talking and speaking in the Egyptian education was very important. So Moses would have been trained to public speak, right? But he'd been in the desert chasing sheep for a while, right? So now that's not what he's been gifted with anymore. So we see this kind of poor excuse. So what is God's loving, gracious response in verse 11, though? Then the Lord said, Who has made your mouth, right? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I? Now, therefore, go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what to speak, right? You don't have to rely on yourself. I made your mouth. I'm the one that's given you this job, so I've made your mouth perfectly for the job it's been given. And also, it's not going to be your words. You don't have to have these eloquent words because they're going to be my words. And I am going to teach them to you. So I will be with you again, and more specifically with your words, and I will guide you, I will teach him. And what is Moses's beautiful response to these beautiful promises in 13? Oh, my Lord, please send someone else. He's out of excuses. He has no more excuses. It's just simply, I don't want to. God, please just send anybody else, right? And this is the first time we see what? Anger. Okay. But it's still a patient anger, right? It doesn't say that, that the fire got big and scared him or anything like that. It just expresses that God is not happy with this response, right? This is just selfishness. This is just fear. Okay. Out of excuses. And we see some anger from God because right now it's just sheer disobedience. It's just sheer will that he doesn't want to submit to God's plan. All right, so even in this anger, how gracious is God's response? Okay, I'm not enough. My words aren't enough. The mouth I gave you isn't enough. So I'll give you your brother Aaron too, right? And he can be your buddy. And if you don't want to be the one talking, you can whisper in his ear, right? So there's this kind of hard to understand verse there at the end. So this is in verse 16. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. Now, he's not God, but he's the prophet, right? So when we studied Matthew, we talked a lot about being a prophet, and one of the major jobs of the prophet was to speak the truth that they hear from God to the people. So That is what that means, is that God's going to give him the word. He's going to be the prophet. And he's going to tell Aaron, who is the people, and then Aaron's going to help him out. I think, I haven't studied this in depth, but I think I remember from just reading through that we see a lot of times that Moses is just speaking for himself. So as he goes through, as God helps him through, like, he doesn't lean on Aaron as much, I think, as he thinks he will, but God is gracious to giving him a partner in this job, a physical being who he knows loves him, right? It's his family, to be there with him and to help him out. He's not going to make him do it just by himself. But remember, who else is he going to take with him? Who else does he have the support of to go as a family? All the elders too. Just that reinforcement that Aaron's coming with you as well. All right, 18 through 23. Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, "Please let me go to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive." And Jethro said to Moses, "Go in peace." And the Lord said to Moses and Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who were seeking your life are dead." So Moses took his wife and his sons and had them ride on a donkey and went back to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the staff of God in his hand. And the Lord said to Moses, "When you go back to Egypt, see that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles that I have put in your power, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, 'Thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son, and I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son.'" So we see, though, despite all of the feelings that Moses has, right? Moses does not want to do this. We see no joyful reactions in obedience here, but we see obedience. He goes back and he does it. And that's just a good reminder to me that my feelings should not dictate my obedience, right? My desire to do something should not dictate my obedience. What should dictate my obedience? The word of the Lord. And that's it. All that I need. And all those promises, though, right? All those reassurances that he's going to give me what I need, that he is the one that promises to be with me. So what does he take with him? So the first thing we see is he takes his family, right? They say bye to Jethro. Jethro's a good father-in-law. He blesses them, sends them with peace. And then he takes his wife and his sons. Okay, so he's going back to Egypt with a lot more than he came with, right? The second part I thought was interesting. Remember, we said we'll see ways that Moses is pointing us to Jesus. So remember, Moses is getting ready to enter Egypt to redeem the people. So the rescuer is coming. And what is he bringing? A donkey. When Jesus enters Jerusalem, what does he ride on? A donkey, not a war horse. That's not how God is going to do his plan. Conquer is not the way of the world. Okay, nobody's intimidated by a little donkey, right? Moses is not going to fight the Egyptian army physically. Remember, that's what he tried to do before, kill the Egyptian and bury him in the sand. That's not how God's going to do his work here. But it is a foreshadowing of Christ. 3, we see he brings his staff, right? All those evidences that God is with him, those miracles he is taking with him. Okay. So we see that Moses is given further instruction, and I'm going to try to go through those pretty fast. Okay, so the first thing he tells them is that you're going to go and do all the miracles before Pharaoh. Second thing he says, you need to be warned. Okay, I'm going to tell you this right up front so you're not surprised. You're going to show him all these miracles, and you would think he'd say, "Oh yeah, go take 3 days." He's not going to do that, right? His heart's already hard towards all of this. So don't be surprised that he's not going to let you go. Okay, so that's this warning to Moses. The third thing we see is he's going to warn Pharaoh. I love my children. Israel is my firstborn, who you've been enslaving and your predecessors have been killing, right? So you can either release them, or I'm going to take your firstborn son. It's going to be right out there on the table, worst consequence from the get-go. He's not going to be ignorant to what God has said. He has plenty of chance to change, and he won't. But he is warned. Okay. So he also tells Moses his purpose is so that Israel can come and serve God. They've been serving Pharaoh for a long time. That time's up. Purpose now is to let them serve him freely. And then the last thing we saw, which we talked about, is the consequence for not letting them go will be death of your firstborn. All right. Exodus 4:24 through 26. This is the part of the story that you kind of just do like, what is going on, right? So, but actually, theologically, some pretty deep stuff going on in these verses. So before we go into it, I want to remind you what circumcision is. So circumcision is man's portion of the promise. So God promised all these things to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and a show of their promise to be committed to strive with God is this circumcision. So it's a big deal, right? And remember, we said that the circumcision is what the Egyptians were using to decide whether or not to kill the babies. Is circumcision here. So this is a big deal. So they're on their way there, and well, let's go ahead and read the verses. It's 2 of them, 24 through 26. At the lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. Then Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it, and said, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." And so he let him alone. It was then that she said, "A bridegroom of blood," because of the circumcision. So here we see Moses is obeying, he's going, but he hasn't committed to fully obeying the Lord. He's circumcised his first son. And then probably somewhere along the way, when things got comfortable in Midian, second son's born. Zipporah doesn't, thinks it's weird, right? This is not from her people. Not going to do it with the second son. Not a big deal. Big deal to God, right? So, and actually a big deal for Zipporah. Big deal for her. Okay. So they haven't been fully obedient. So something happens in Moses where God is confronting them and Moses is dying. Okay. This is bad. And apparently Zipporah knows what she needs to do, right? Takes a flint knife out, circumcise her son. She is not happy mama. She is not a happy mama. But this is important because the covenant is also with her. Covenant is not just with the men, it's a sacrifice from the women as well. And remember that, yes, the firstborn of God's children were the children of Israel, but all along the way, he's been bringing in to his family, extending grace to these women who are also called to circumcise their son. So I think this is just as much for her as it was for Moses in this obedience as parents, that we're going to commit to God as a family. And she's the one that has to circumcise her son. And right, once again, we got obedience, but we don't have what we think about with, just, oh yeah, I feel like doing this, right? No, she is not happy about this, right? You are a bridegroom of blood to me. But what we see before that is, who is she following? She's following her husband who's listening to God. This is a great example of a godly wife and her actions. Okay. So she's not been raised in the family of Israel, right? She does not understand the covenant, but she's brought into this family by the Lord. She doesn't understand why in the world you killed somebody in Egypt, right? Why in the world would we go back there? She trusts her husband that he's heard from God and is following him, leaving her whole family behind, taking her sons to this dangerous place. A lot of faith is going on in her heart here. And then she has to do what? She has to circumcise her son to save them. Once again, we see that without her, there's no next step. Moses died. So she's called to be a faithful helper, to reach out and help Moses when he can't. So we see another obedient follower of God, even when the desire to do those things isn't there, even when they are hard. And once again, we see that God uses a woman as a rescuer, as a hero in this story. You know, it just kind of goes back and forth, right? Doesn't it? The men do this, the women do this. It's co-heirs in this redemption plan as we go through Exodus. So something I was thought of was interesting that I hadn't thought about before, but was this term, this bridegroom of blood, right? Every circumcision is a bloody procedure, right? How is Zipporah being brought into the family of God? Through Moses, through this bridegroom of blood to her, through this covenant. But we have a better bridegroom of blood. Who was poured out for our rescue. So in Matthew 9, verses 14 through 15, then the disciples of John came to him saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" So this is John's disciples asking Jesus a question. Basically, why do we have to go hungry when your disciples don't, right? We want to eat too. So they asked Jesus this because John has already told them, like, hey, I'm not the dude, Jesus is the dude, right? So they come and they ask him, this is a good thing that they've done. And his answer is this: can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. So here is Jesus referring to himself as the bridegroom, right? And then we look on to an even greater conversation, a greater teaching of Jesus in Matthew 26, 27 through 29. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you. For this is my blood of the new covenant." So we see the bridegroom of blood, the old covenant in the Old Testament was the circumcision. Jesus has a better covenant for us. We celebrate that in communion, where we get what he teaches us here, which is poured out for many of the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it with you in my Father's kingdom. So just a sweet reminder of God's promises and how we are brought into the family. If you're a Christian, you are brought in through your bridegroom, the bridegroom of Christ, blood poured out for you. All right, we started a little bit late. We need to finish up here still. So Exodus 4, 27 through 31. The Lord said to Aaron, "Go into the wilderness to meet Moses." So he went and met him at the mountain of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord with which he had sent him to speak, and all the signs he had commanded him to do. Then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders and did the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshiped. So, what do we see God do in the end of chapter 4? Starting to keep those promises right away to Moses. We see that Aaron loves him and is excited to see him and that he will help him, just like God said. We see that the people, Moses was so afraid the people wouldn't believe him. And what do we see? That they do. They believe, they listen to him and they believe. And the best yet, what is their response? For the first time, the people, when we look at the end, 31, and the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshiped. So this is the first time the people of God have gotten to worship him by the name Yahweh. To give him glory and praise, even in their slavery. That the self-existent I am, they believe, is going to keep his word to them, that he is going to redeem them, rescue them. It is a great word to end on. So, Psalm 29. Ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful, and the voice of the Lord is full of majesty. And they're seeing that, and they're Yahweh. Let's go ahead and pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this time. We thank you for revealing yourself, that you need nothing from us, but that you treasure us so much. You extend your grace to us, especially through the work and the blood of Jesus Christ. Lord, I pray when we are tempted to lay out a line of excuses about why we're not good enough, that you turn our eyes to see that you are due glory, and that even when we don't feel like it, Lord, that we can obey. Please help us to be a people that desires to worship you, not only in our songs and in our prayers and in our study, but those who honor and worship you through obedience. It's in your name we pray. Amen. All right. So, we're kind of getting off with the reading scheduled, but that's okay because I like you guys to be further in advance in your study than what we are covering in class. So this week I adjusted it just a little bit so that if you've already studied chapter 5, that's good, but I think reading over it and keeping it fresh, but moving on and studying up through chapter 7, 13. So I forget why I put the break there, but there was a reason. There was a reason why I broke it there. It just made sense in my mind to have that. So go ahead and pray and read through Exodus 5, 7 through 13, and then start to do your study. So write down things that are meaningful to you, especially when you see God revealing himself. He's going to be revealing himself in all these plagues here soon, and revealing himself not just to his people, but to the people of Egypt. So when you see a characteristic of God, or you see where he's really patient with the people, even though they don't deserve it, or you see where he displays his power in the plagues, go ahead and write those things down, especially if words are repeated. That's going to be a great place to start your study. The third thing that I kind of wrote down as a helper is try to pick a verse or two for meditation throughout the week. So that just means you're going to spend extra time praying through these verses and thinking about these verses. A lot of times I like to put those verses as my screensaver on my phone, so just that I'm reminded of it more throughout the week. And the fourth thing is to chase down a lead. So I know a lot of you are like, D, you're a broken record, but we have new ladies to the study. So what I mean by chase a lead is kind of what I did today when I jumped to the New Testament. So like to me, it was just as simple as this. Like I read that bridegroom of blood, and I just went to my Bible app and just typed in bridegroom, and every scripture on bridegroom pops up. And so I just kind of skim through them till I see one that I feel like is connected contextually. You know what I mean by that? I'm not taking a verse out of context, but the theme of what is being said rings true to what's being taught in the Old Testament. And I'll spend a little bit time studying there. So that's what I mean by chasing a lead. And a lot of times people are like, I just don't know how you do it. Really, it's that simple. Like I type a word in to an app and it gives it to me, right? Also, if you have a good study Bible, they have great cross references for you. So you can just look up those cross references and go to those places. But thanks for joining me this week. I'm going to stop the recording, but if people want to stay and visit, we can do that too. So let's stop that.